Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this early kickoff. And I should also thank Sonia and the 360 team for being kind enough to let me present live. I found doing a recorded session a little bit odd and unsettling, and I'm one of those odd people that actually prefers the kind of fly by the seat of the pants approach of doing it live. So here we go. So when Sonia and I first started talking about this presentation and this notion of kind of the future of qual, it kind of got me thinking a little bit about how we've been using qual at HBO Max and Warner Media over the past couple of years. And what I kind of realized is that the future of qual is here now. And what I mean by that is, I started to kind of do an audit because my gut instinct was that we were unconsciously maybe moving away from quant as a group and starting to do more qualitative research. And I thought, let's just start with a little bit of an inventory. Over the past 18 months, how many qual studies have we done compared to quant studies? And it actually turned out that we had done double the number of qualitative studies compared to quant studies. And I thought, this is so curious. It kind of happened sort of subconsciously. It wasn't something we planned. And I thought, what is underlying this? And I realized that there were probably two key factors at a high level. One was that increasingly the team was starting to really explore the vast toolkit of qualitative techniques that have been available for years, but really starting to dig in and experiment with a wider range of these techniques. And we were starting to feel like they were actually addressing the business needs pretty independently of quant. But then COVID happened, and COVID suddenly opened up this whole world of digital qual to us, which enabled us to scale and pursue qual in, I would say, even more of an aggressive fashion than we had in the past. And quant has truly become a little bit more of a recessive approach for us within the team. So when I was thinking about the future of qual, I thought, well, between this movement towards more of a qual-centric approach on the team, coupled with the accelerant of COVID, the future is kind of now. And I really feel like qualitative research is having a renaissance. And maybe it's not even a renaissance. Maybe it was sort of a sleeping giant that just needed to be sort of brought back to the fore through this kind of confluence of forces. So I think, there have been kind of four mind shifts, certainly within our business. I think historically, one of the challenges that we had as a research team was that, our stakeholders didn't really see qual as a I guess, legitimate methodology. It was sort of seen as focus groups, and focus groups were by nature seen as, do two groups, see if people kind of like something. Oh, my deck seems to have dropped. Okay, I'll just keep going. Sonia, I'm not able to see the deck, but I will see if I can just pull it up here on a separate screen. I'm not sure if everybody else has had the deck drop. So I think one of the first key things that we had to do is really, shift the business away from this perspective that qualitative research was this kind of narrow technique where you did these brief focus groups and, people sort of, evaluated concepts and sort of raised their hand and said, yeah, this works for me, or no, this doesn't work for me, or, optimize this or optimize that, or what does everybody think? And, we started to really educate the business that qualitative research was so much more than just these kind of quick turn focus groups. Okay, deck is back, hurrah. I think the other thing that really shifted for us was that there have always been historic limitations to qual. So, qual was a little bit restrictive because we always felt like we needed to be there in person. So, you were limited in terms of the markets that you could cover and even the sample, because time was a factor and then cost was a factor. So, we were never able to do a lot of really broader scope qual and cover, a vaster population and cover a wider range of markets because time and money didn't allow for it. But digital, of course, changed all of that and opened up a much broader range of opportunities for us to take qual in different directions. I think part of the hangover of this notion of qual being very much focused on, or very much kind of grounded in focus groups, was that, focus groups are very much aligned with doing, evaluation. How many people like this? How many people don't like this? What would you change, or what would you optimize? Okay, great, thank you. And so it was really just about kind of getting that, like, a quick check with consumers. And once we were able to really press the business beyond this kind of focus group orientation to really start to use a really wide range of different qualitative techniques, we started to teach the business and educate the business that qualitative research could do far more than just evaluate concepts or evaluate marketing promos, but has the depth and the flexibility to address a wide range of business needs. I think, kind of referencing this ability to, cover broader samples, talk to more consumers, cover more markets than we could historically, qual has been able to take on a broader scale than it has historically. So we've been able to kind of move beyond much more of a subjective and descriptive approach to qual. Here's what people said, here's what people liked, here's what people didn't like, to really starting to, derive much deeper insights that are scalable and drive strategy because of the scope of qualitative research that digital has enabled. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through 4 core ways that we have been using qualitative research to inform key business decisions at Warner Media and HBO Max, to build frameworks, to distill future opportunities, to deliver depth understanding of critical consumer audiences or consumer targets, and to generate new ideas and concepts. So let's start off with framework building. I think, again, historically, our approach was to build frameworks, largely starting with quantitative research. And, it kind of worked pretty well. You'd do a survey and you'd look at what behavioral patterns were, or you'd start to look at, emotions that people associated with content, or the needs that people were getting met through different genres of content. And, you'd look at what patterns were emerging in the quant, and that would sort of become the basis for a framework. But what always kind of niggled us as a group, and this was long before COVID was, is this framework really exhaustive? Did we capture all the different nuances of consumer behavior, consumer psychology that really makes us feel confident that this framework has longevity? And I think we very quickly realized that quant was not the ideal starting point. And we started to look at we started to look at using qualitative research in different ways to actually build frameworks that we then validate with quant. So I'll walk you through an approach that we've used for one of our core frameworks that is really knit into all of the different research that we do within our group. So one of our core frameworks is what we call a needs framework. And the needs refer to the needs that consumers are trying to fulfill when they make decisions to watch different shows and movies. And the needs are really tightly aligned with genre. So what are you trying to satisfy? What is the intent behind watching this show? And did those needs get fulfilled? And we realized that we just didn't know what those needs were. And it was going to be very hard for us just to hypothesize about what those needs were and then kind of plug them into a quant survey and validate them. So we started off with a really sort of extensive breadth approach where we did depth qualitative research with a wide sample of consumers. So we did IDIs in effect. And our intent at this stage was to uncover the universe of needs that drove content choice. And we ended up with a ton. But then you're sort of left with this thought, okay, so we have 20 needs, but surely not all of these needs are equal. Do they apply to all viewing occasions, all types of genres? Are these needs truly universal? So the next stage really helped us start to distill the extent to which these needs were universal and repeatable. So did we really have a framework here, or was it just sort of a snapshot of everything under the sun? So we started to deploy longitudinal digital diaries where all day long, whenever somebody watched something, whether it was on TV or a streaming service, or whether it was through a social media feed, we had them capture what they watched and identify what the need was they were trying to satisfy through that viewing occasion. This intermediary step was really vital, because what it in turn helped us do is understand the universe, moving from this kind of universe of like endless numbers of needs to really start to pinpoint which needs were showing up time and again across occasions and connected to specific genre types. And I'm just going to flip ahead to show you, this was the framework that emerged purely from this two-step qual process. So we uncovered 8 core needs that in turn we did validate in quantitative research. But I think what's fascinating about this model is we built this 4 years ago. So again, well before COVID, and no matter what research we've done, what technique we've used, whether it's been qual, quant, agnostic of sample size, agnostic of sample type, the same needs have been repeated over the course of the 4 years with very little change. Now, I'm going to give a proviso here that with COVID, we did start to see some new and different needs emerging. So, you know, I feel like this has had a great shelf life. 4 years is not bad. But as we speak, we're actually going back to the field to do a refresh of the needs model using pretty much the same research trajectory that I just shared on the previous slide. And, you know, this needs model is really, really vital to us. It's been the basis for our core consumer segmentation, which is a segmentation that we're using across the Warner Media business, broadly speaking. And the needs model is really that kind of core connective tissue that is the basis for our segmentation, is starting to inform content strategy, and is really becoming critical for how we market to core consumers, whether they are HBO Max subscribers and we want to retain them, or we're trying to acquire them. Okay, so moving on to the next major way that we use qual within the group for opportunity identification. So again, you know, what used to happen a lot in our businesses, the engineering team would come up with like a cool digital experience, or the product team, you know, would sort of see what was happening maybe in some adjacent industries and say, hey, we've got some really interesting ideas for some new features. Let's test them and see whether we should launch them. So we take these ideas, we'd maybe do a little bit of qual. Do people like these? What could we, you know, optimize? What should we maybe, you know, shift and change? And then we'd do some quant research to understand the scale of the opportunity, and we'd launch. But again, we were always struck with this idea that if we're really starting to look towards like an 18 to 36 month future pipeline, have we really anticipated where consumers are heading if we're just generating ideas and, you know, internally and then validating them with quant? So again, we decided to shift the way that we did things and begin identifying these future opportunities with consumers explicitly. This is the 6th year we've done this study. It's called Future Forward. It's one of our core studies that we use to identify consumer trends at the intersection of content and technology. So we speak to experts in our field, in entertainment, in media, as well as adjacent fields, but we also speak to advanced consumers as well. Now, this year was different, and I just want to flag, historically, we would go in field and we would do, you know, multi-day ethnographies with these consumers and watch them, you know, in bars, and watch them with their friends and watch them consume content in different environments. And this year, obviously, we couldn't do this. And I frankly was extremely nervous and thought we're really going to lose a lot of depth and texture if we take this all online. But as you'll see, one of the themes of this presentation is we did lose some of that intimacy and immediacy, but we were actually able to, by taking all of this research online, we were able to speak to an even broader base of consumers beyond these 5 markets that you see here on the screen. We were able to speak to consumers who are in a wider range of different disciplines and industries. So we were able to go broader without sacrificing the depth. So, you know, at the end of doing this research, which involved the kind of the confluence of expert interviews and diaries that extended over the course of 7 days, which replaced the ethnographies, as well as the in-depth interviews, we ended up with a ton of texture and a ton of interesting foresight into where consumers are heading when it comes to content consumption, the sort of content they're looking for, as well as the platforms that they're viewing content on. And so today, actually, we're going to be taking these 15 opportunity areas, and we're using another qualitative technique, which is workshopping internally. So we're sitting down with our content groups, our product groups, our marketing groups, and our strategy groups, taking these 15 opportunity areas, and we're actually going to workshop different ways that we can implement these opportunity areas across the business and really start to generate concrete business experiences off of these 15 opportunity areas. But again, we began with qual to make sure that we really were mining, making sure that we were on the cusp of emerging trends and not just working with, the sort of existing set of ideas that we had within the business. So the third area that I'm going to talk about is 360 understanding. Now, I think we all know that qualitative research is amazing when it comes to depth. I mean, and that's never been, something that's been, I think questioned. And we've always used qualitative research really heavily to get, a visceral sense of who our core consumers are. But the challenge was that we never really knew that the stuff that we were finding out through these kind of in-depth interviews, the information that we were gleaning was scalable and really applied to a broader population. And so during the pandemic, we launched a new initiative within our group, which is what we call our underserved community research. So doing depth research with the Black community, Latinx, LGBTQ, and the Asian community to understand how we as an entertainment industry can better serve the needs of these communities. And again, I was really nervous about moving to a purely online methodology because I worried about losing the depth and texture. But to walk you through this really, really quickly, we actually were able through a digital platform called D-Scout to get genuinely scaled insights that in many ways have, the validity of a quantitative study without sacrificing the depth of a qualitative study. So we begin with having respondents on D-Scout submit recruitment interviews. We got 185 of those. So that's really a quantitative sample from which we were able to pick consumers who we felt were broadly representative of the community itself, but also different ranges of pain points, concerns, barriers, behaviors, so that we could dig into those through the video diary missions and then the in-depth interviews. And, between doing an average of about 42 diary missions, as well as then pulling from these diary missions, 35 respondents to do 75-minute in-depth interviews, 10 friendship and family pairs to do 90 minutes of in-depth interviews. We had a wealth of information that was validated across this really broad sample of respondents. And we were able, in the case of our Latinx study, to identify three clear paths for the business to follow that didn't actually require any quantitative research. This was an end-to-end study that used exclusively qualitative research to provide a roadmap to our product team, our production teams, our content strategy teams, our marketing teams, and even our diversity teams that enabled them to have a very clear path to better representing these audiences, because the research was, because of COVID and going digital, highly scalable, but we didn't sacrifice the depth. We were able to, really get a lot of texture and depth of understanding, a 360-degree understanding of the needs of these communities. Okay, I'm going to whiz through the final one. This has been, I think, a really fun journey for us as a team, which is using qualitative research for idea generation. Now, this was a pure experiment that has actually become, I think, a really fundamental methodology for us within our group. So about 3-4 years ago, my team and I were tasked with helping the company build a pipeline of new digital ads that didn't in any way reflect traditional 30-second linear television ads. And that felt like a really big, meaty task. And we were like, where do we start? And I started to draw on a methodology that we used extensively when I was at General Mills in my CPG days, which is co-creation, where you sit side by side with consumers and R&D, and you physically build new products. And we thought, how could we leverage this technique that's used for building physical products to actually build digital products? So ad experiences and some other things that I'll talk to you about. So we basically made up an approach that leveraged the kind of fundamentals of physical co-creation, but adapted it to designing slightly more abstract ad experiences. Again, COVID really kind of changed the way we did things. The first year that we built out these ad experiences, the first 2 years, I should say, of co-creation sessions, we did 3 days of intensive 6-hour workshops with consumers. 2 days of intensive workshops with consumers across 2 markets. So 40 in total, but we would do, these 6-hour sessions. It was a real hothouse environment. You would get, consumers would get tired by the end of the day. We really put them through a wide range of ideation exercises, but it was rich, and we generated a ton of great ideas. So when the business wanted us to go back and build a new set of ad experiences using the same technique, COVID hit. And I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? We can't do in-person workshops. Can we actually keep the texture and that kind of hothouse environment of in-person ideation in a digital, via a digital platform? And I was so pleasantly surprised that I think we are going to really, rethink how we do co-creation moving forward and probably adapt more of a hybrid model. So we were able to go bigger than we could have with in-person. So we started off with a homework assignment, and then we spent 5 days with consumers versus just 2. We were able to cover a broader range of markets than the 2 that we would have done with in person. So we got very good geographical coverage, and we were able to capture a broader sample across a broader age group as well. And we were able to do 2 rounds of longitudinal co-creation, where we had some sessions that were individual, where consumers would ideate and brainstorm on their own. And then we would do live ideation sessions where consumers would build off of each other's ideas. So I guess the question is, did it work? It worked amazingly well. So I think with the in-person co-creation, we generated fewer ideas, but they felt they felt pretty rich, and we felt, comfortable that they were valid because they would crop up time and again over the course of the 2 days in the 2 markets. I think what was interesting about the approach that we used, the presentation has just dropped off again, but that's okay. The interesting thing about going digitally was that, there were moments where the ideas felt a little bit superficial, and I was a little bit worried that we weren't getting the depth, but, getting that volume, we got a high volume of ideas. So round 1, 670 ideas, round 2, 500 ideas. We ended up generating 1,100 ideas for digital ad experiences, of which our objective was to have 40 that we would shortlist to 15. So even though some of the ideas were truly terrible, that scale enabled us to really cherry pick and identify the ideas that we thought were unique, that were really consumer centric, and that kept coming up time and again across the 2 rounds over the course of the 5 days. So, again, what we sacrificed in terms of that depth hothouse environment, we made up for in terms of generating a really bewildering and rich array, bewilderingly high volume of ideas that enabled us to really distill, the best of the best. So, we've been able to, identify 15 more of these ad experiences that we're fine-tuning via qual, and then going to test in quant and in an in-lab environment, and they're going to be launching. And this has been such a productive methodology that, effectively we just made up and then had to pivot again with COVID and make it up again for a digital platform. But we have now used this methodology for all of the work that we're doing, building new ad experiences, building new features, building ancillary experiences for HBO Max, as well as interactive experiences for HBO Max. So I think what's really, heartening for us is to see that this technique is enabling us to generate ideas that start with the consumer versus starting with our product and engineering team, which doesn't always feel very consumer centric to us. So in closing, I just wanted to kind of end with 4 key themes. Why have we tilted so much to qualitative research? Well, I think there's something inherently and infinitely flexible about qualitative research. I mean, you can invent new methodologies like we did with co-creation and then pivot from physical to digital, which we did with COVID. You can also shift course in the middle of a study if you feel like, wait, the questions we're asking aren't quite right, or this is a really set of interesting insights that is emerging we want to validate. You can always kind of change things in a way that you can't with quant, which is much more rigid and inflexible once you've kind of launched the questionnaire and you're in field. I also think that qualitative research is inherently consumer first. The ideas that you're generating are born from consumers, rather than us making assumptions about, what consumers' needs are, what, trends are emerging with consumers, what underserved communities want from the entertainment industry, what ideas or what kind of ad experience would resonate with consumers. We're actually generating those ideas with consumers at the inception. I also think there's now this magic because of digital and the fact that COVID made us sort of embrace digital as a vehicle for doing qualitative research. We can now get really scalable insights, but still get the depth that, I think qualitative research has always been, really finely attuned for. And I think as well, because we've been able to go broader, cover more markets, and even capture broader, more representative samples, qualitative research has really become an end-to-end solution for us. So while I think historically it was always the precursor to qual or quant, let's do a little bit of qual and then that'll feed into the questionnaire. We're now doing really important studies that the business is using across multiple business groups, from product to production to marketing to content strategy, that are end-to-end qual. And nobody has actually said, oh, well, when is the quant piece coming? I have never heard a stakeholder across any of these studies say, where's the quant? Because the qualitative research has just been so rich and so informative and so validated through the different techniques that we've used that we've been able to, ultimately, leverage a range of qualitative techniques in a way that we wouldn't have been able to historically, I think. And it's really been a great substitute for quant and provided, I think, more richness than quant would have done as a corollary. So that's it. I think I'm maybe a couple seconds over, but I see that there's also some questions coming in as well.
Yes. Thank you very much, Natasha, for your presentation. And we're going to jump right into the questions. You can ask your questions in the chat, or you can use the raise hand button on the top of your page, and we would bring you live to ask Natasha a question using your video and audio on. So we have the first question from Yamin, and the question is, are you seeing known researchers leveraging qual, specifically in product?
So product has been the most challenging group to get on side because they normally would just develop the ideas and the concepts internally that they would then hand to us to test. So product and engineering and design have been the hardest groups to convert. But I would say the big success story for us with product is that they now see co-creation as their core vehicle for generating new digital experiences. And now it's on their roadmap and their calendar. And the minute something appears on an engineering roadmap, you've had success, because that means that it's baked into their process. It has taken a few years, but I think we're finally there, and it's been incredibly rewarding to see them embrace co-creation.
Perfect. Thank you. And we have a question also from Ariane. What is the sample size you tend to use for projects like this?
So for co-creation, we historically, when we did it in person, we do 20 consumers across 2 markets, so 40 in total. Now we're going up as high as 60, and in some instances even 80, because we're doing 2 sessions. But we can recruit broad because we've got consumers. We're able to recruit consumers to a digital platform where they can come in and come out in a much more organic fashion. So, we're not paying huge incentives because it's digital. We're not demanding, 12 hours of their time. So we're able to recruit a much broader sample. So, with D-Scout, we began with 185 and went to 42 to about 45. And this is deep, deep, deep ethnography. And for co-creation, we're almost doing like, I would say, quant. But, quant in terms of the size of the sample, but qual in terms of the depth of the insights and the flexibility and our ability to kind of really dig in and pull insights out and probe and do all the kind of, traditional qual techniques. And this is all because of digital. And I was not convinced that we could go all digital when COVID happened. I was the first person to really freak out and think we're going to lose all that texture, the nonverbals, the context, really starting to, build that like trust with consumers over the course of multiple days. And we may have sacrificed a bit of that, but I feel like we've more than made up for it with the ability to really scale across markets and speak to more consumers than we would have historically.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natasha. If you have any further questions to Natasha, you can use our networking tab and reach out directly to her with any additional questions you may have. And thank you very much for being here and sharing your experience. And right now, I would like to invite you all to our second presentation on consumer co-creation in remote environment, creating fun and effective experience. By Malaya Kumar, Director Performance Management Makeup at L'Oreal. So one more time, thank you very much, Natasha, for being here with us. And I invite you all to our next presentation.
Thanks so much, everyone.